Hey everyone, it's NBA Guy, and joining us today from Miami, Florida is David Hines, who's going to share with us his thoughts on how the PPP loans were being distributed back in June of 2020.
The government, the Treasury, they gave $2 trillion for PPP loans for small businesses. 85% of it went to major corporations. Every small business I know of, they're shutting their doors. Can't pay the rent.
Now, what David neglected to mention in that interview was, at that point, he had received $3.9 million worth of fraudulent PPP money, and he had submitted 7 fraudulent applications. He had received the funds less than a month prior to that interview. Now, you may be wondering, what on earth was that news segment about anyway? That was a news segment done by CBS Miami. It was about random people who are getting citations for not wearing masks in public in Miami, Florida.
I think it's hilarious and disturbing because we're wearing surgical masks as though they're making any difference in this pandemic. It's so ridiculous. I don't know if I could bring myself to actually participate in this insanity. I feel silly, with a surgical mask.
Now, to be fair, Florida did become the epicenter of COVID-19 a while after that news segment, but that's a whole different topic and a discussion for another time. Now, it's safe to assume that $100 citation was probably paid with no problems at all, given that David had received $3.9 million in fraudulent PPP money thanks to the PPP loans, courtesy of you, the taxpayer. According to a complaint, David Hines submitted 7 fraudulent applications between April and May of 2020, seeking $13.5 million. Out of those 7 applications, unfortunately, 3 of them were approved. That netted him about $3.9 million of fraudulent PPP funds. The complaint goes on to say that instead of using this money for payroll, David used the money for food delivery services, rideshare services, personal expenses at dating websites, luxury jewelry and clothing retailer expenses, Miami Beach resorts, and he also purchased a 2020 Lamborghini sports car for $318,000. Now, David used 4 different business names for his applications, and as you can see right over here, out of these businesses, 1 of them was inactive at the time he applied for the PPP funds, and 2 of them were reinstated on March 4th. So this was after the PPP loans were announced and right before he started applying for fraudulent PPP money. If you scroll down in the complaint, there's this footnote that says the only recorded activity of a business online comes from reviews on the BBB website for ProMaster and WPM. Both businesses are F-rated businesses on the site. Based on customer comments, it appears that ProMaster and WPM acted as brokers for moving services. Virtually all of the reviews include complaints related to bait and switch practices and other deceitful activities. Now, I did go on Yelp to look at these businesses, and the reviews are in line with this footnote over here where people are saying that there was a lot of bait and switch going on and the reviews are rather bad. Now, based on the 3 fraudulent applications that David got approved, he claimed that he had 70 employees with approximately $4 million in monthly payroll expenses, while records indicate that he at most had a dozen employees and payments were made via Zelle and Venmo with memo lines such as Gerard Work for $704 and Jordan Work for $1,531, and in no case did these payments exceed $3,000. The complaint goes on to say that in May, Hines received deposits of $10,380 and $794,835 in PPP funds into 2 separate accounts. And in these 2 accounts, before these deposits, the balances were 30 cents in one of them, and the other one was negative $31,369.17. So it's safe to say that David would have not been able to pay that $100 citation if it was not for PPP money. The complaint goes on to say that David then took these funds and transferred them into a savings account, and from that savings account, a wire for $318,497 was sent to a dealership with the following note: Lamborghini Huracan Evo. It's funny how record keeping becomes a lot more immaculate and clean when people start purchasing big ticket items with stolen money compared to payroll records of Gerard Work done via Zelle or Venmo for $704. So now let's take a look at some of the expenses that David had right around the time when David was caught in that new segment. So let's start with $15,000 for mom. You got to take care of mom. Some cash for himself. Mom, again, $15,000. That's very nice of him. Saks Fifth Avenue. All right, $4,622 here. Subject B. It looks like they left out people's names. Fontainebleau. Okay, it looks like rich people spell Fontainebleau very differently than I would. This seems like some type of hotel or resort that we will check out right after this. Hines cash, $9,500, right under $10,000, okay. Subject A, subject C, Setai Hotel Miami Beach, $7,264. And he lives in Miami, so he's staying in hotels. Subject C, subject D, Graf Diamonds, $8,530. And the Miami Beach E, $5,988. All right, so I'm gonna have to check out what Fontainebleau is all about. All right, so let's see how much these rooms really cost. $4,000 for one night, $1,500, $1,980. Okay, so David was really living it up in this hotel. Artful Cultured Desire, the Setai Hotel Miami Beach. Fashionable Fusion, okay. Rooms and Suites. Ocean Suites, Art Deco Suites, Cultivated Luxury. All right, so at the Setai Hotel, rooms seem to cost about $1,000. Okay, so it's probably going to be tough going from this type of a place to a jail cell because as of the date that I'm making this video, David has already been sentenced to prison. But I'll cover that in a bit. All right, so let's take a look at some of these applications. Now remember, that new segment was shot sometime in early June 2020. Now on April 18th, 2020, David submits his first application claiming that he has 8 employees and that he has $40,000 in monthly payroll expenses, but he only makes a claim for $10,380. Now remember, the PPP loan was meant to cover 2 months of your average payroll expenses. So him saying that he has $40,000 in payroll expenses per month, but only asking for $10,380 tells me he was maybe just trying to figure out if this would even work, or maybe he didn't fully understand how this loan worked at first. But in any case, he does get the $10,380, and in less than a month, it gets deposited into his account. And then on May 9th, he makes a second claim or a second PPP loan application, and this time he says he has 49 employees under this business name. And this time he claims that he has about $318,000 in payroll expenses per month, and the amount that he claims for the PPP loan is about $795,000. So this time around, he did it right, and he gets this money in about 4 or 5 days. The date it's deposited is right here, May 13th. This money gets deposited into his account, and I think this is the same money that the postal inspector was mentioning where he put it into an account that had an overdrawn balance. But on the same day, May 9th, he submits yet his third application saying that now he has 13 employees for ProMaster, and this time he's saying that he has almost $1.3 million in monthly payroll expenses, and he claims almost $3.2 million, and he does get this approved as well. This takes about 2 weeks. It gets deposited into his account, and then he goes 1 day later under a different business name. This time he says he has 9 employees and says he has about $2.5 million in monthly payroll expenses and asks for about $6.4 million, but this one gets rejected. So I want to stop here for a second and look at these numbers. Now, back over here, he had 49 employees and he only has $318,000 in payroll expenses. Here he has 13 employees and $1.3 million in payroll. It looks like these guys right here were paid a lot less than these guys here. So these are the low-waged workers and these are the higher-wage workers. He says he has 9 employees and says he has about $2.5 million in monthly payroll expenses and asks for about $6.4 million in PPP funds for this business. Now, under the PPP rules, all salaries were capped at a maximum of $100,000. So if he's saying he has 9 employees and he's asking for $6.4 million for 2 months worth of payroll for these 9 employees, that clearly exceeds the PPP guidelines, and this is where he gets shut down. It looks like he did not read those PPP disclosures. Also, look at the frequency of these submissions. He was submitting these right one after another. So once this gets shot down, it looks like in about 10 or 12 days, David works up the courage. He itches to do this again. And this time he takes the business that had already received funds. He applies once again. And this time he says he has 170 employees. Remember, last time it was only 13. And now he's saying he has $720,000 a month in payroll expenses when these 13 employees have $1.3 million a month in payroll expenses. But unfortunately for him, it was declined again. But 3 days later, David tries again. You gotta give him credit for not giving up here, I guess. And he uses the same business name that had already been approved for $794,000. This time he says he has 49 employees. Well, that's the same as the first time around. And that he has $315,000 in payroll expenses. So these numbers here are very close to these numbers here. So it's almost as if he's submitting the same application again to a different bank. Once again, he gets shut down. But what does he do? 1 day later, same business, same number of employees. He just reduces the monthly payroll amount a little bit, as well as the claim. But once again, he gets declined. And this is where he stops. And that new segment that you saw was about a week or two after this last transaction. Perhaps David felt justified in getting this fraudulent money because he claimed 80% of it was going to big corporations, which at the time headlines were saying things like that. So maybe that is true, but perhaps he felt justified in taking some of the money for himself based on that. Now, this story came out back in 2020 and received a lot of coverage. However, there is one detail that nobody has talked about up until this point. There is one additional victim aside from the taxpayers that nobody has acknowledged. So as an MBA guy first, to the delight of my one subscriber, because I only really have one subscriber on this channel as of the date that I'm making this video, you can check that. There is one additional victim who I'm about to reveal. And I guess revealing victim names is usually not a really good thing. But in this case, the victim is the 2020 Lamborghini Huracan that David dragged into the story. Now, I was able to locate this car on a very interesting website that sells yachts, watches, cars, and luxury mansions. Now, this is the actual car that David purchased with PPP funds. As you can see, it is a beautiful car, and the website seems to be located in France, which I thought was very odd. But I was able to pull records on this car. It looks like since this fraud happened, it was seized by authorities and has just been depreciating and going from dealership to dealership. It was last listed for sale for $298,000. All right, so the story does not end over here, and it gets even more interesting. So if you look at the dates of what happened, in March, PPP gets rolled out. In April and May, David commits his fraud. And in July, the postal inspector files a complaint against him and he gets arrested. That tells us that David was caught early on with his fraud scheme. Now, we all heard stories and saw headlines about PPP funds being abused and people taking advantage of the system. However, people were not getting arrested early on. It took a while to build cases against them and for the investigations to conclude. David, with his Lamborghini, or I should say with the government's or with us taxpayers' Lamborghini, was involved in a hit and run. When he was involved in that hit and run, he takes off, but the victim is able to get his license plate and turns it into authorities. Once authorities run the license plate, locate the car, and find him, they get suspicious and they start looking into his finances, and that's when they discover that the car was purchased with fraudulent funds. David was arrested for the hit and run in July, and he gets charged with the fraudulent PPP loans in July as well. He gets released to his mom's house with an ankle monitor after making bail. But the story doesn't end over there. It looks like David has had a history of doing shady stuff with Lamborghinis. Back in 2018, according to an article that I found, David flagged police officers down and told them that his girlfriend stole his Lamborghini, obviously a different Lamborghini at the time, and that she took off with it. Police officers were able to locate her and the car, and shortly after that, David becomes uncooperative and he gets arrested for assaulting a police officer, resisting arrest, and his girlfriend gets arrested for resisting arrest as well and possession of a controlled substance. So back to David's PPP fraud story. So David was sentenced to 78 months in prison in May of 2021. So that's about a year after he started his fraudulent activity. And he was hit with another $100 fine. And it's safe to say that David will not be paying that fine with taxpayer money this time. Well, that's it for this time. I hope you guys enjoyed this entertaining story. I'll catch you guys next time. Take care.